In the 1890s, a forgotten author wrote a series of kids' books about a rich young boy named Baron Trump. This boy lives in a place called Castle Trump. His guide on adventures is a wise mentor named Don. Sounds a little on the nose, right? But what if I told you the same author then wrote a dark political novel called The Last President? It's about a chaotic election that throws the United States into chaos, with the epicenter of that chaos being a hotel on Fifth Avenue in New York City. This isn't a script for a modern political thriller. These books are real, and they were written over 130 years ago. Their rediscovery has sparked a firestorm of questions and viral theories online. Is this the most detailed prophecy in modern history? Or is it just history's wildest coincidence? The story really kicks off in 2017, when users on internet forums stumbled upon the works of an obscure 19th century American author, Ingersoll Lockwood. Almost overnight, his books became an online sensation, not for their literary genius, but for a series of parallels to modern American politics that are, to put it mildly, uncanny. Let's start with the most obvious one. In 1889, Lockwood published Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and his wonderful dog Bulger. The main character is a young, incredibly wealthy German boy named Wilhelm Heinrich Sebastian von Trump. But he goes by Baron Trump. The name alone is enough to make you look twice, considering Donald Trump's youngest son is named Baron. The fictional Baron is a restless kid who lives a life of luxury in his family home, Castle Trump. The parallel to Trump Tower, the real-life home of the Trump family, is hard to miss. But the coincidences don't stop there. In the books, young Baron is mentored by a man described as the master of all masters, a wise figure named Don. So we have a boy named Baron, mentored by a man named Don, living in Castle Trump. The connections are starting to stack up. If Lockwood had only written the Baron Trump kids' books, this would just be a remarkable historical curiosity. But it's his other novel that takes this from curious to deeply weird. In 1896, Lockwood published a grim dystopian novel titled 1900, or The Last President. This isn't a children's adventure. It's a dark political story that describes a nation in chaos. The plot centers on the shocking election of a populist outsider, which triggers massive protests and social unrest. The book describes New York City in a state of uproar, with mobs of angry citizens marching in the streets. It specifically says the new president-elect is barricaded in his hotel on Fifth Avenue, the exact same street where Trump Tower stands today. The story paints a picture of a deeply divided America on the brink of collapse, under a so-called last president, a boy named Baron Trump. Mentored by Don, living in Castle Trump, and a populist last president from New York, whose victory sparks chaos on Fifth Avenue. When you lay all the pieces out, it's easy to see why these books have become a modern-day enigma. The question isn't if the parallels exist, the question is how. So who was the man behind these strangely forward-looking books? Who was Ingersoll Lockwood? Ingersoll Lockwood was born on August 2, 1841, in Ossining, New York, into a prominent family of lawyers. His father, Munson Ingersoll Lockwood, is not only a lawyer, but also a general in the New York State Militia, and, for a time, the warden of the infamous Sing Sing prison. Following the family path, Lockwood trained as a lawyer, but his career began in diplomacy. In 1862, at the height of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln appointed him U.S. consul to the Kingdom of Hanover in Germany. This made him one of the youngest American consuls at the time. After 4 years in Europe, he returned to New York City and started a law practice with his brother. But by the 1880s, Lockwood had found a second calling as a writer and lecturer. He wrote about everything legal texts, poetry, and of course, fiction. He even used the pseudonym Erwin Longman for some nonfiction works. His personal life wasn't without its own drama. He married a woman 21 years younger than him in 1884, but they divorced 8 years later. He never had children and spent his final years as a recluse. In 1912, he published his last book, a collection of poetry, writing in its preface, "The end has almost come. I'm only waiting for the signal to push off and begin my voyage to the Isles of the Blessed in the far western seas." Ingersoll Lockwood died on September 30th, 1918, at the age of 77, in relative obscurity. His books had failed to find any lasting success. Contemporary critics often called his children's stories derivative, like a weaker version of Alice in Wonderland. One reviewer in 1891 wrote that Lockwood labors through 300 pages of fantastic and grotesque narrative, and then striking a spark of wit. But the sparks emit little light and no warmth. For nearly a century, that was the final word on Ingersoll Lockwood. He was a forgotten author whose works were destined to gather dust. But history, it seems, had other plans. To really get the mystery here, you have to look at the books themselves. Let's start with his children's novels, Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog. Bulger 1889 and its sequel, Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, 1893. These books were part of a wave of fantastic adventure stories in the 19th century, inspired by the runaway success of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. They follow a young German aristocrat, Baron Trump, who is fantastically wealthy, but completely bored with life at Castle Trump. He's described as a boy with a very active brain, restless and hungry for adventure. This leads him to a man known as Don, a friend of his father's. In the second book, Don gives Baron an old manuscript that describes a world within a world deep inside the earth. The only way in is through a secret portal in Russia. There's no map, but Don gives him a cryptic piece of advice. As you travel through Russia, the people will tell thee where to find it. So Baron and his loyal dog, Bulger, set off on their journey. The adventure starts very specifically in Russia detail that has definitely raised some eyebrows in modern conspiracy circles. Baron's quest takes him deep into a hollow earth, where he finds bizarre, lost civilizations. He meets the transparent folk and the rattlebrains, a race of people with tiny heads who can't remember anything for more than an hour. They see this as a good thing, believing that without memory, there can be no grudges. They're terrified of Baron's large head, which they assume is full of dangerous memories, and they quickly banish him. Throughout his adventures, Baron is portrayed as a boastful character. He loves to talk about his superior intellect and has a habit of handing out personalized insults. He gets into trouble, offends the locals, and usually has to make a quick escape. When they were published, these books were flops. They were seen as imaginative but unoriginal and quickly faded from memory. They're stories of a rich kid with a big brain and an even bigger ego who, guided by a man named Don, goes on an adventure that starts in Russia. On its own, it's a quirky piece of literary history. But when you pair it with Lockwood's next book, the coincidences start to feel less like a quirk and more like a blueprint. If a children's book about a boy named Baron Trump was eerie, this is where the story takes a darker, almost disturbingly prophetic turn. 3 years after his last Baron Trump novel in 1896, Ingersoll Lockwood published a completely different kind of book, 1900, or The Last President.
Oh.
This wasn't a whimsical fantasy. It was a short, grim political novella that reads like a warning. The story opens in New York City on a specific date, November 3rd, 1896. The city is in a state of pandemonium after a shocking presidential election. A populist outsider has won, and his victory is met with widespread fear, anger, and protests. Lockwood describes a city teetering on the edge of anarchy. He writes of a state of uproar as mobs of outraged citizens roam the streets, their anger aimed at the wealthy elite. Anarchists and socialist groups call for death to the rich man, and the city descends into chaos. Lockwood paints a vivid scene, writing, "The entire east side of New York City is in a state of uproar." For many modern readers, the parallels to the political climate after the 2016 election are impossible to ignore. But the most specific detail is where the chaos is centered. The newly elected president is described as being barricaded inside his hotel on Fifth Avenue while the city rages outside. This detail is startling given that Trump Tower, Donald Trump's residence, and the site of numerous protests is on that very same avenue. The novel's protagonist is never named Trump, but he's a populist figure whose election threatens to bring an end to the American Republic. The title itself, The Last President, implies a final, catastrophic end to the United States as we know it. Lockwood was writing at a time of great anxiety in America, with widespread fears about populism and class conflict. His novel was, in many ways, a political satire of his own era. But the specificity of his vision, the populist outsider, the New York City setting, the Fifth Avenue Hotel, and the title, The Last President, has made this century-old book feel less like a historical artifact and more like a contemporary commentary. It's the combination of these two very different works, The Adventures of Young Baron Trump and The Dark Prophecy of the Last President, that creates the core of this mystery. One seems to predict the players, the other the events. Coincidence or something more? We've laid out the books, the characters, and the parallels. They're undeniably strange. Before we get into the really wild theories about how this could have happened, what do you think? Is this just a massive, intricate coincidence? A case of history accidentally rhyming in the weirdest way possible? Let us know in the comments. And if you're finding this as fascinating as we do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Alright, now we're moving from established facts into the realm of popular theory. This is where the story goes from strange to straight-up science fiction, weaving together internet forums, government secrets, and one of the most brilliant inventors in history, Nikola Tesla. The theory hinges on one key person, Dr. John G. Trump. John Trump was an accomplished physicist and engineer, longtime professor at MIT, and pivotal in developing radar for the Allies in World War II. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant scientist. He was also Donald Trump's uncle. That family connection is the linchpin. The story goes like this. In January 1943, the genius inventor Nikola Tesla died in his room at the New Yorker hotel. With World War II raging, the U.S. government was worried his papers might contain designs for advanced weapons, like a rumored particle beam weapon known as a death ray. To keep this tech from falling into enemy hands, the Office of Alien Property Custodians seized all of Tesla's belongings. The government needed an expert to analyze Tesla's work. The man they called was Dr. John G. Trump. In 1943, he was given access to the private, revolutionary papers of Nikola Tesla. Officially, Dr. Trump's report concluded Tesla's work was mostly speculative, philosophical, somewhat promotional, and didn't contain workable principles for new weapons. He basically dismissed the death ray as impractical. But this is where the popular theory takes flight. Proponents suggest John Trump found something much bigger in Tesla's notes, not a weapon. But the theoretical foundations for time travel, the theory alleges that John Trump passed this secret knowledge to his family, specifically his nephew Donald. This secret knowledge, combined with a hypothetical time machine built from Tesla's plans, would have allowed the family to know the future, or maybe even influence the past. In this telling, the Ingersoll Lockwood books aren't a prophecy or a coincidence. They're either the result of the Trump family traveling back in time and planting the story themselves, either as a joke, a guide, or a way to mystically write their own destiny. It's a wild, elaborate theory that connects a forgotten author, a brilliant scientist, a legendary inventor, and a political dynasty. To be clear, there is zero verifiable evidence to support any of this. It's pure speculation. But it does provide a fantastical explanation for a series of coincidences so strange they almost seem to demand one. It suggests the answer isn't in the past, but in a future that has already happened. So, where does that leave us? On one hand, we have a series of 19th century books about a boy named Baron Trump, mentored by a man named Don, who has an adventure starting in Russia. The other, a dystopian novel from the same author about a populist outsider winning the presidency, leading to chaos on Fifth Avenue in New York. And finally, a sprawling internet theory connecting it all to Nikola Tesla and time travel. The logical explanation is coincidence. History is a vast, messy thing, and it's statistically likely that names, places, and events will eventually align in strange ways. Lockwood was writing about the anxieties of his time: populism, class warfare, social unrest. Then those themes tend to repeat themselves. The alternative is to believe in something more. To believe Lockwood was a prophet who somehow tapped into a vision of a future he could have understood. Or, if you prefer sci-fi to mysticism, you can entertain the time travel theory that these books aren't a prediction, but a message planted in the past. An incredible coincidence, a forgotten prophecy, or evidence of a temporal conspiracy. The story is written. What we make of it is up to us. What do you believe?